This is my parents' wood stove, and it actually, I thought that it was significantly bigger than my wood stove, and it is, but once I sat down and started like, you know, setting up for recording, you actually realize that it doesn't look that much larger than me. I think in terms of height, it sits at a similar height as my tiny wood stove. I think it sits at almost the same height, actually. But theirs is significantly wider and theirs is significantly deeper. My wood stove, my tiny wood stove, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, my tiny wood stove can take pieces of between 8 and 10 inches, and 10 inches is like the max. Like I've cut 11-inch pieces before of like really, really, really thin kindling and like put them kind of diagonally, but like 10 inches is the absolute like max, and even 10 inches is like, on my wood stove, 8 inches is, you know, the preferable length of firewood, whereas their wood stove can take just like it's a standard size wood stove. It can take up to standard size pieces, which I believe is 15 inches. So just your standard log size, which is significantly larger than mine. The main benefit, of course, of having longer firewood is that it's much easier to stack in an organized kind of manner, because my firewood is much, much shorter, and it's just, there isn't a great way to stack it. So I thought that I would talk about firewood because I haven't spoken too much about firewood on this channel. So before I talk about the wood stove, I get a lot of comments quite regularly about folks being like, if you want to extend the burn time of your stove, you need to be burning harder woods. And so the reason that we don't burn harder firewoods is because we don't have any harder firewoods around here. Fir is really the main firewood of choice. We do have some larch, and I do burn some larch. I've been burning some larch this year, but still, it's just, it is what it is. If we wanted to get some like harder woods like oak or maple, we would have to source it from much, much, much farther from where we are. And it is really recommended that you burn it where you source it. And that's because if you are trucking a whole bunch of firewood from really, really, really far away, then you are really looking at the potential of introducing pests into your environment. So we do not want that at all. And so your other option, if you are looking to truck in firewood from farther away, is to get essentially like kiln dried firewood, which is like professionally dried firewood. You don't just dry your firewood in your yard or on your property or whatever. And that buying firewood like that, sure, it might extend my burn time a little bit, but then I'm having to purchase firewood. And a really big reason why both of our houses use wood as a source of heat in our homes is because the only alternative where I live is electric heat, and electric heat is extremely expensive. And so if I'm going to be paying especially that much for firewood, I may as well just run my electric heat, and then I don't have to fart around with the wood stove at all. So that's one of the reasons why we don't burn harder firewoods. We burn softer firewoods here, namely fir. My parents are burning fir all this year. So let's get into this stove versus my tiny wood stove. If you haven't seen my tiny wood stove videos, definitely check them out. I'll link them in the description. I talk about my tiny wood stove a little bit more there. This is a Blaze King. I will link what stove specifically this is, but this is just like a very standard kind of wood stove. The main difference between this one and my tiny wood stove is that this is designed to work and operate more like a furnace. That's the best way I can describe it. You can, you know, like open your air controls and you can get it to run and have it more for the aesthetics, but by and large, if you're looking to heat your home with it, this is what you're gonna see. And there is actually like wood in here. It's probably not loaded up like crazy, right? But this is what you're going to see most of the time with one of these devices. Now, the upside, of course, is that this thing, with burning fir, right? So that softer wood that everyone's talking to me about. So my parents are burning strictly fir this year. With fir, when they load this firebox up, mostly because it's a full-size firebox, right? It's double the width, but it's also definitely double, or probably double and a bit more like deep, right? So you can fit much larger chunks of wood in here. Even while burning fir, their burn time for this is between 8 and 12 hours. So they basically just load it up in the morning and then they're good to go for the day. They load it up in the evening, they're good to go for the night. That's the main benefit that you're going to have with a wood stove like this versus a tiny wood stove like mine. My tiny wood stove is much more aesthetic. You know, you can hear the fire crackle within the wood stove. You can see the flames, which I personally really enjoy. This is a heating device for your home. It's very modern. It's very easy to use. It is really fantastic. The maintenance for this, my parents haven't had to do any maintenance for this yet. But the thing with my wood stove is that it is a 4-inch flue pipe. So it is a very small, very narrow flue pipe. You want to keep that as clean as possible from, you know, creosote buildup, right? So I inspect my tiny wood stove, my flue, every single month. I just pull the cap off of the bottom because I have a rear exit in my wood stove. So my stove vents out the rear, not out the top. So it's really easy to just pull off that bottom cap and inspect it every single month. I also get my stove professionally cleaned, a minimum of twice a year, but I want to, depending on how much I burn, I might clean it 3 times a year as well, or the types of wood, right? If I'm burning birch, for example, which I haven't been burning this year because it hasn't been cold enough, but if I am burning birch, birch is known to have a lot of buildup, versus my parents' wood stove is a much more normal size flue pipe. If I had to guess, I would I know on film it doesn't look like this stove is that much bigger, but it's so much larger than my tiny wood stove. If I had to guess, their flue pipe is probably something between 8 and 10 inches. Like it's much larger. And so that's not to say that you shouldn't ever worry about creosote buildup, but it's less of a concern here, much more of a concern with my tiny wood stove. You do obviously need to get this like serviced. I haven't read the manual for this. I mean, I read a little bit of the manual, but because this isn't my wood stove, I'm not really overly concerned about how to use it. But I know with my tiny wood stove, you want to make sure that you're cleaning that flue pipe like all the time. So then that brings me to, if this wood stove is so great, why do I have a tiny wood stove? Why would you ever buy a tiny wood stove? The only reason to buy a tiny wood stove, in my opinion, is if you are in such a small space that you need a tiny wood stove, to be honest with you. Do I regret my tiny wood stove purchase? Absolutely not. When I was researching what wood stove to put in my tiny house, which is around 150 square feet, I researched getting a more full-size wood stove. And I could have done it. It's not that I can't, but when you have only 150 square feet to heat, that's a lot of floor space I would be giving up for a full-size stove. And not to mention, like, these more full-size stoves, like this stove is meant to heat 1,500 square feet. So this is a bit overboard for my place, which is 150 square feet. So that is the only reason to get a tiny wood stove, is if you literally do not have the space for a full-size wood stove. And if you are living, you know, the tiny house life, whether you have an accessory dwelling unit, whether you are in a bus or a van, or, you know, like whatever your living arrangement is, you're not going to have the floor space for something as large as this. Like this is massive. I would say if you don't need a tiny wood stove, get something like this that's designed more similar to a furnace. You know, get a tiny wood stove if you want the ambiance, you know, if you are like me and you are heating a really small space, then it, you know, doesn't overly matter. But otherwise, definitely get a more full-size wood stove. I love my wood stove a lot. This is my second winter with my tiny wood stove, and it's been a great stove. I do not regret my purchase, absolutely not, because I've done a lot of research between, should I get a tiny wood stove, should I get a full-size wood stove, like what are the pros, what are the cons. The nice thing about the tiny wood stoves that I was looking at the time, you could go and you could read the entire manual, right? The one thing, and I talked about this a little bit before, the one thing I would say, if you are in the market for a tiny wood stove specifically, you have decided that a full-size wood stove is like not your jam, whatever, for your living situation, and you're looking at a tiny wood stove specifically, make sure that you read the manual very carefully. Read their about section very carefully. And if all else fails, contact the manufacturer, whoever's, you know, or the seller, contact somebody. Because the thing that I found when I was purchasing my tiny wood stove is that many tiny wood stoves, they would say in the manual somewhere, not for full-time year-round use. So that's one thing that you need to just be aware of. My stove is built for full-time year-round use, but some of them are not. They are really built for, I don't know, maybe you have a cabin, like a tiny cabin somewhere, and you only use it in the summers. So just like be aware of that when you are shopping around for tiny wood stoves. Otherwise, any full-size wood stove that you get here, you don't really have to worry about that. If you just go to your local hardware store, like hardware stores everywhere around here sell stoves that are pretty much exactly like this. You don't really have to worry about those full-size wood stoves, you know, not being for year-round use, because they are for year-round use. So in conclusion, only get a tiny wood stove if you need a tiny wood stove. If you do not need a tiny wood stove, just get a full-size wood stove, because these are really nice.